We are live. Yes. Welcome to another episode of The Brothers Discuss. I'm Alex.
And I'm Chris.
This is the episode we've all been waiting for. We're talking, of course, about our thoughts and recap of the holiday blockbuster of 2017. We're talking, of course, about Netflix's Bright, starring Will Smith and his orc buddy. We're going to get deep in that today. That's about it. Nothing else. And we'll try to talk a little bit about The Last Jedi too. Before we get into Bright, let's just sort of gloss over the return of the Last Jedi as quickly as we can. Just a quick aside. Did you ever check out the Netflix series, The Toys That Made Us?
I watched like the first few episodes, but I never really got into it that much. But.
Well, it's for those that don't know, it's a documentary series about the history behind some of the most popular toy lines. And the first episode is Star Wars. And it's like, yeah, some company made that and it was no problem for them. The actual story behind Kenner, who were nobodies at the time, getting like they were basically the booty call for George Lucas after he got rejected by everybody else because everyone was like, we're making toys for TV shows. Nobody makes toys for movies. The movie comes in and out of a theater. There's not a constant thing to remind you every episode to go buy toys. No, we're not interested. Kenner was like, holy crap, we want this so bad. And the lengths they went to not only deliver a proof of concept, but then to deliver a product that didn't come out for a year after the movie was released. Like, you got to watch it. They cover He-Man, G.I. Joe, Lego. The toy industry is just like, I mean, the only real insight I had in the toy industry prior to that was the movie Big with Tom Hanks. Remember Big?
Oh, yeah.
He got a job at a toy company because he was a big kid. And just as an aside to my aside, real quick, I think it's funny that one of the complaints is that characters were created in the interest of making toys. But, I'm going to come back to this point because I have some large-scale opinions on what is going on right now with the Star Wars world and the fandom, and it's mainly about porgs. But we'll get back to we'll get back to criticism. So this is going to be a polarizing episode for some of our listeners.
Yeah.
And just know that Chris and I also have differing opinions on some things. So it's going to be an across the board breakdown and discussion about all things episode 8 and then Bright.
Like the first person to think about Bright in 4 years.
I know. Never forget. We have criticisms of the film, but overall, I personally liked it a lot.
We're talking about Last Jedi, not Bright.
Yes, we're talking about Last Jedi right now. Just to clarify here. It's some of my post-analysis of the film. I've discovered some issues that we can get into, but the most important thing to me was when I was sitting in that theater watching it for the first time, I felt emotionally engaged, like the whole film. I mean, there was like one or two moments where I got taken out of the film and I was just wondering, like, where's this going right now? But for the most part, for me, it was just such an engaging experience that's what film is supposed to do. It's supposed to hit you in the moment and give you like an entertaining experience. And I was like fully on board while watching that movie. I was excited. I was on the edge of my seat. How about you?
Yeah, I pretty much, when I first saw it in theaters, I did think it was pretty tense, especially when you get to like the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act. It gets really tense in there. And even though like back when it came out, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but I was like emotionally, invested in it. And I had issues with, certain characters, not just, characters that we've seen before, but like the new characters too. Over time, I've definitely, grown with this movie a lot, but the one constant thing is that I was always emotionally invested in the movie.
And I remember because we saw this film together, and whenever something made me laugh, we were both laughing, and it was like a real like, oh my God, this is so amazing. That was hilarious. And we decided we were going to hit this breakdown with some of the most popular criticisms of the film, and one of them was the humor. A lot of people couldn't get down with the humor. It was too wacky, too Marvelized is what people are calling it. And not once did I pick up that was going to be a problem with people until I started reading about it online. While we were watching the movie, like I thought this was the perfect dose, the perfect balance of tones. Everything moved along and it felt real complete. Star Wars always had a lighter side to it. Yoda himself was a goofball when he first showed up in Empire. He showed up was just trying to get Luke's goad right away by just being a jerk, and that whole thing was like slapstick, like
Yeah.
he was hitting R2D2 on the head with a stick and going like mine. Like, that's nuts. And I mean, there's inevitably going to be a lot of comparisons to the previous films, both the originals and the prequels, when we look at Episode 8 here. I guess before we go any further, can I just go ahead and say who I think the MVP of the sequel trilogy was?
Go ahead.
I think it's Adam Driver.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love Kylo Ren. I think he's one of the best additions to the Star Wars universe. He's amazing. And when we get into it, I love what Rian Johnson did with the story arc. He didn't make it easy for Kylo. And when I first saw this movie, I thought redemption for him wasn't even an option, because Kylo is a character that has been let down so hard by the legacy of Star Wars. Like, the legacy of Star Wars itself has ruined his life, and it broke him. He's a broken man because of not only the expectations of his family name, but the legacies of the people of his life. Like Luke, Han, Leia, they all broke him. And he's a great villain because the build up to him becoming a villain it's everything George Lucas wishes Anakin's journey was. It's a believable transformation for someone who is just, through his own idealized version of his goals, is just kind of misled. He's a little emotionally unstable. He thinks he means well. It's all the things that a good villain should have, And I think Adam Driver is very good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love Kylo Ren, and he definitely shines the brightest in this movie. Like, once you start to understand, everything he's been through, like it's in Force Awakens, he was this really intimidating villain, and then the second he took off the mask, it's like everything changed. He doesn't look like a Darth Vader. He tries to act like a Darth Vader, but he isn't a Darth Vader. And once you really start to understand why, it's insane. I mean, I really love his backstory. It's incredibly tragic and really, really, yeah. It's
and yet he was an inspired choice, and I actually learned more about him after that too. Like, I didn't give him a fair shake, and once I found out that he's ex-military, I think he was a Marine, but then he also established a program for Marines to get into like theater. So a bunch of Marines can get together and sort of artistically express themselves in ways they may not have been able to. Like, he seems like a pretty badass dude. I think he's just a great choice. I love the guy, and I think he did a lot for the series.
Absolutely.
I'm sure I don't know how the Star Wars fandom feels about Adam Driver on the whole, but given how the state of affairs right now with the fandom,
I think generally speaking, like definitely out of like all of the new cast members, the fandom is they go easiest on Adam Driver.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, and I think that's because they like his character more than any of the other characters in the sequel trilogy. But yeah.
And look, I have no doubt that most people that sound terrible on the internet are probably decent people and fun to hang out with in real life, but something happens to somebody once they go through the internet filter. It can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
Want to really jump into The Last Jedi now? Like, let's try to get through this as quickly as possible so we can talk about Bright. So here's the crazy thing. Bright and The Last Jedi are sort of on two sides of the Rotten Tomato scale. On one end, you have The Last Jedi, which was a critical smash. Like, last I checked, it was in the 90s for the critic score. And the audience score, as we all know, has tanked. And there's been some research that a lot of it was automated and may not be as genuine as it appears at face value. But then on the other side, you have Bright, which is just laughable to critics. But the audience score is like in the 80s or something like that. And they're like, nah, man, we had fun watching this movie. Go screw yourselves. So, I mean, we'll get into that later. But with Star Wars, we're going to cover some of the, like I said earlier, we're going to cover some of the popular criticisms and kind of talk about how we felt about those. So where do you want to start? Like, you want to just jump right into Luke?
I guess, yeah.
Actually, wait, take that back. Can we start overall? Like, can I rant for a sec here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So here's my sort of general perspective on all this, right? Which is I feel as though people sometimes fall into a trap of expectations with these, and they're just films. And the thing about them since the very beginning, since George Lucas came out of the gate with Star Wars and became a smash hit just because of that first movie, A New Hope, he was always just making shit up and then picking up the pieces later, you know? Like, for example, there is no chance, none whatsoever, that he considered Darth Vader was Luke's father when they made A New Hope. Like, clearly not on the table, right? So when they get to the second film, and basically what I'm trying to say is that every step along the way is like as long as you're adding something to each part of the story, you continue to world build, but you're always going to end up making something up. And especially given a story where characters that are supposed to be the heroes are such abysmal failures, you know? Like, I think that's a very bold decision. And while it's not a perfect film, I think it's interesting to me looking at the series. Like, there's always stuff that was going to be a problem. I'll give you another quick example. So Lucas introduces in Empire Strikes Back that Jedi can be Force ghosts, right? So where are all the rest of the Force ghosts throughout history? So that was a corner he wrote himself into. And then later, he had to explain that Qui-Gon Jinn figured out how to be a Force ghost. And that's super lame. That is so lame. So where's Qui-Gon Jinn's Force ghost then? I mean, like in some ways, when you try to explain too much, it backfires like gloriously. And I think he did the same with like midichlorians. It was like, we need to explain somehow how things happen with the Force. That's sort of my basic feeling going into this, just so everyone is aware. And it ties in really well with one of the biggest criticisms overall. And it does apply to specific characters, but there was not enough explanation for certain things. People feel that more should have been explained. And it's because of the prequels, suddenly there was a precedent that everything needed to be explained. But people don't seem to realize that that's when it started to suck. When Lucas was sucking the magic out of everything and giving everything labels, it was like, no, dude, there was magic. Like, there's no magic anymore. Now it's like parasites. Like, dude, and no matter how people felt about that, whether they loved it or hated it, I think it was ingrained in them that that's how it was now. Everything needed to have a twist. Everything needed to be connected. Everything needed to be explained. So like every character is there for a reason. There's just not characters that are just that part of this universe. No, they're related to somebody or their origin is somehow earth shattering. And I think between the prequels and the expanded universe, which is defunct, by the way, it's gone. It doesn't have any, like, it's not a part of the Star Wars universe anymore. Disney erased it. But what the expanded universe did, unfortunately, was spend the last 20 or 30 years slowly explaining everything you've ever seen in a Star Wars film. Every character, every piece of equipment, every off-screen tradition suddenly had like a full encyclopedic entry, its own novel, its own comic book series, and suddenly there was no more mystery. Everybody knew everything about every character, and I hated that. I hated it. I love the fact that I didn't know what a hammerhead was called. I just like that there's this weird dude in the corner who didn't look like anybody else, who was just called Hammerhead.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like, it's day one of the franchise. All of these movies they're just movies. They're just artistic visions from all these different directors and writers. And look, whether you like the sequel trilogy or not, like collectively, I think the sequel trilogy is a big artistic mess, but whether you like them or not, like you can't deny, like this is wildly different than something you would get from like Marvel per se. Like, yes, bringing Palpatine back is lazy, desperate, stupid. I don't like it at all. But at the very least, that was a decision that Abrams made. That was not a decision that, Kennedy made. So it's that, and that's something it's fans, you could doubt this all you want, but fans just like the more generic. It's they don't like it, or they claim that they want risks, but when you go with the risks, obviously you're going to piss people off, and then you're going to You're going to exclude a lot of the hallmarks of the franchise when there really shouldn't even be hallmarks to begin with. Like these are all just movies, and I've wanted Star Wars to get a little bit more. I want Star Wars to get more wild and more free, and have these artists just go crazy, honestly. But yeah, but fans fans are definitely holding the franchise back, unfortunately.
Yeah, the
And
fandom itself has become, I think, the biggest enemy of the film series and where it's going to go, because there is no other film series like this, like you were saying. I mean, there was the Lord of the Rings films that had 6 films, but it didn't have the history in cinema that Star Wars has. Like, the legacy that's been brewing for the last, like, 40 plus years, you can't compare that to anything else. And just everything that's come along with that has created this weird set of expectations. And I don't know how they're ever going to they're never going to make everybody happy, but there's never been a perfect Star Wars film. They're all stupid. They're all dumb. They're amazing films and they're a huge part of my life, but they are the dumbest films ever. Like, let's just be honest here. It's dumb fun. They're the Bright of the sci-fi genre. Like, there were always a million problems. Things didn't make any sense the whole time. Star Wars had stupid stuff going on in the films. It was never a perfect execution of an idea, but I didn't want it to be either. It's science fiction fantasy, and it gave me everything I ever needed from that. And what people are seeking from it now is more than that, and they're just going to be hurt and let down over and over again, to the point of, like, not enough explanations. They're like, okay, so here's the first, Snoke. People were upset that he had no backstory and he was just dead before we learned anything about him. But that exact same thing happened to the Emperor, and nobody had a problem with that, because over time they had forgotten that he wasn't always Sheev Palpatine of the Galactic Senate, because when we first saw him, he was just a ghost in the transmission room. That wasn't even the same actor. It was the freaking makeup artist's wife wearing a bunch of putty on her eyes and just being very vague. Like, all we knew is that Vader answers to this guy, but we don't know anything else about him. But when we finally see him in person in Return of the Jedi, we don't get his backstory. We don't know his name. We don't know if he's a Sith. Like, we don't know why he's displaying powers that nobody else has shown yet. Like, he's the only person for like 20 years that ever shot electricity out of his hands, and then he was dead. That's it. Vader picked him up and threw him in the toilet, and it was over. No more info for the Emperor.
And the reason why is because Emperor is in service of Vader's arc, much like how Snoke is more in service of Kylo's arc than just being there for the sake of being there.
Yeah, and and it's just the perfect example of Lucas making stuff up as he went, which is what always happens and what is always going to happen. And then people take that as gospel. Like, they take the Jedi as gospel, but what many people don't realize, that the Jedi weren't mystical holy warriors until Francis Ford Coppola showed up and tapped George on the shoulder and was like, hey, what's up with these dudes? He's like, what if they're more like monks and they harness like a chi, except it's not chi, it's something else, spacey. And that was it. Like, there's no bigger story involved in some grand plan of George Lucas's. He's just making it up as he goes. And it's great, but don't mistake that for a holy text. And that's because they hit a wall. Then they just jump kicked the wall and blasted right through it and found a new path. And unfortunately, the new path did not lead to anything great with the Rise of Skywalker. And everyone's furious. So, yeah. And look, I'm not going to begrudge anybody that didn't like the film. I feel like people get so into these stories and into these films, they develop an emotional relationship with them. And I get that. Like, you know how I felt about the Hobbit films, right? I mean, for God's sake, I was like obsessively pissed about that film series in a way that other people were bothered by. Like, a buddy of mine was like, dude, you got to let go of this film series. And we're all there. We're all on that level of feeling passionate about the things that we love. And I don't blame those people one bit. I'm not going to come down on those people, but I just happen to differ in my own opinion with Star Wars. But the only bone I have to pick with the fandom is that a lot of people that are upset don't seem to have any tangible critical complaints about the film. It's just emotional complaints. They just hate it. But there's no like critiques as in what they could have done better. And it's just like, Luke was stupid. I hated Luke. He wouldn't be like that. Because Luke personally was my favorite character in the whole movie. I thought he was great. And I thought he made a lot of sense in terms of the kind of progression that if you just sat down and stepped back and you looked at all of Star Wars, and then you look at Luke Skywalker and his place in this legacy, he came into the game late. He was too old. Yoda said he was too old. He was too old to start, but he was their last hope. And that's it. So he's kind of like a half-baked Jedi. And to me, he never came off as if he was great, like he was some kind of master. He was just the only one left. And he never really came into his own powers, and he didn't have a lifetime of training. And he also didn't even defeat Darth Vader like he was supposed to in order to complete his training. And I'll put an asterisk on that. He didn't defeat Darth Vader the way he was supposed to. He turned to the dark side to defeat Darth Vader. He wasn't winning the fight. He was hiding from Darth Vader until Darth Vader goaded him by bringing up his sister, and that pushed Luke over the edge. And he rushed Vader in anger out of fear. So anger and fear were the driving factors into Luke's eventual win over Vader. But he just kept beating him, and the look on his face, like I showed this to you at some point, but the look on his face when he was raining blows down on Vader is the same look on his face in Kylo Ren's version of events that happened to him in the tent. It was that crazy, like, maniacal anger rage face. And there's one frame of it in Jedi, and it's like, that is not a man at peace with his destiny. But then he tosses his lightsaber aside once the Emperor points out, hey, damn, you totally just dark-sided him, man. Great, finish him off, and let's do this. Let's be the new team. And Luke tosses his lightsaber aside like he's suddenly righteous, and he's like, nah, man, you just won that fight the wrong way.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting to point out that he throws his lightsaber away. You see where I'm going with this? Because that's what he did the first time we see him in this film. Like, this is a man who has a lot to live up to, and then once he gets into it, he sees the cracks in the house that is the Jedi Order. And like all the weight that's on his shoulders to make sense of everything that's come before him, it's definitely enough to break a character, especially when it's him between someone whose future he's seen that is so catastrophically awful as Kylo Ren. And that's just such an interesting story point for him as a character. Do you have anything to add to that?
Pretty much what you've said, yeah. And look, I'm gonna be honest here. Like, if Luke was the way that fans wanted Luke in this movie, it's just boring as hell. I mean, it's not, it's whether it makes entertainment for you or not, okay, but it's not interesting in the slightest. It's just, like I said earlier, it's generic, safe, and boring, in my opinion. If you had Luke just be, you know, he had the same, like, go get him optimism, like, that younger Luke would have in his early days. And that would just suck. I think this is definitely, like, the best way to go with his character.
Yeah.
And
so you have, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, like, so you have Luke, someone who's had his own struggles with his own demons, with his own dark side turmoil, who's trying to live up to an impossible legacy and to try and bring a little bit of balance to the galaxy. And not only does he fail to do that, but he also causes a catastrophic rise in a darker power than arguably the Empire. Like, his treatment of Kylo Ren can be argued as the cause of, maybe if he didn't do that, Kylo would have never run off and lent his power, which is instrumental to the rise of this new, like, opposition. So yeah, if you really break that character down, what they did with Luke is probably the best possible path that character arc should have gone. And like you were saying, a lot of people were upset that he wasn't, like, wise and more master-like, and he didn't show up at the end of the movie and start, like, flipping around and making little cyclone attacks like Yoda did in the prequels, which would have been terrible. That would have been terrible. Luke was never that guy. He's undisciplined. He's kind of rough around the edges. He's a farm boy, and he's like a blue belt. If Jedi were Brazilian jiu-jitsu masters, Luke never got his black belt, and he tried to open his own gym. And it's like, dude, there's a black belt out there who's just waiting for your students to come to him when you fail to deliver the actual full lesson. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you're going to continue making Star Wars films, you need conflict. And if there's going to be a conflict, you need to put characters into their place in order to have new conflict. So I think coming right out of the gate with Luke Skywalker in a position where he's conflicted and having trouble with the state of affairs is really fascinating. And I think he's had it. He's like, I don't want this lightsaber. Get this thing away from me. It's a bunch of baloney. And I love the line when he says, like, you think I'm going to come running out there with a laser sword? Like, I love that line. And there was a moment where I first started to realize that the fan response was so toxic. And I was like, toxic maybe is an unfair word, but just very negative. Like, I didn't even realize that was even a thing. And when I started to see it, my mind was just blown. Like, what is happening? People didn't like this film. And I went to Reddit and started going down Star Wars threads. And I started to see for the first time that people hated Luke Skywalker. And I was confused. And I remember one thread where this guy was like, oh, for him to just throw his lightsaber was just a stupid, cheap laugh. And somebody was like, well, how should it have happened? And he was like, picture this. He set it up as if he was dying for somebody to ask him for his opinion. But like, she hands him the lightsaber and he looks at it and a dark history crosses his face. And you see confusion and sadness. And then he just looks up to her and slowly, in a resolved way, just simply says, no, and hands it back to her. And I would have laughed at that too, but for the wrong reasons. That would have been so cheesy and dumb. I'm sorry. Adding no to Star Wars is what ruined it in the first place. No. No more adding no to Star Wars. Come on.
Oh, man.
I remember. Sorry. No, yeah. Like, I remember in the theater when Luke threw his lightsaber, you and I both started cracking up, and I turned to you and I said, dude, that is the cleanest cliffhanger pickup I've ever seen. Because I'll be honest, I don't like Luke's reaction at the end of Force Awakens. It's so melodramatic for it to build up to that. Like, that was the only way to save that ending, and I was so happy. A lot of people thought that he wouldn't do that, but then I like to think, well, why wouldn't he do that though? That's the thing that's funny. It's so unexpected, you know?
Here's the thing, and I'm sure when we did our sequel trilogy discussion, I'm more than positive we brought this up, but like, this was, if you're gonna don't throw shade at Rian Johnson for Luke in this movie, because this is something that was set up in Force Awakens.
Yes, like, exactly.
Luke, and this is a line in the movie too. It's like Luke didn't, he didn't run for no reason. He didn't hide for no reason. There was a big and clear reason. And of course, fans, they took that in a million different directions, and they came up with the most like MacGuffin things of all time as to why Luke really ran away. It was so stupid when this is, it's a simple solution here, but it's really effective. He just simply, he didn't have any more options. He felt like he just kept piling on to the mess that the Jedi have been like piling on for generations at this point, and he just wanted out of it. And I think that's the best solution. Definitely not a terrible solution is to, have him secretly be wanting to rebuild the Jedi Order once again, and he's waiting for someone to come find him, and then it's like, just dial it for a second. That's a mess.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because people are still young and hopeful, and I'm turning into an old man, and I'm just becoming more and more like, get off my lawn. And I get it. Like, somebody shows up to my place and it's like, here's your past. I present it to you, old master. And I'm like, bitch, you've got 10 seconds to get the fuck off my property. But then showing his routine and going through his life is one of the greatest joys I've ever seen. Like, him just trying so hard to turn her off when he when he took a hit of that green milk, like
Right.
the face he made, that just quenched some well-deserved thirst. And that pole vault he did was dope, and he caught a fish with that.
Yeah.
And I do want to say something right now, just as we move on. Like, apparently, from what I understand, J.J. Abrams did not plan out the trilogy from beginning to end. And Rian Johnson was writing The Last Jedi during the time The Force Awakens was being produced and released. Like, there's this weird, uncanny thing going on in The Last Jedi, which feels like it's responding to fan reactions to The Force Awakens, but it really isn't. Like, it may a little bit. Like, they may have done some pickups, but something, for example, like Rey's parentage, that's more from what I understand was less Rian Johnson being like, well, fans are really into the idea of the parents, so I'm going to throw them a curveball. But I think it's more like, what would be the most challenging thing for Rey to hear as a character? You know, what would be the hardest thing to hear is that her parents were nobodies.
Yeah.
And there was actually a report, I think we brought this up last year as well, that JJ saw the script for episode 8 and was actually upset he didn't get to direct it. But I remember hearing that Rian Johnson kind of invaded the space of the story group and invited himself into their workspace and is like, can I please just chill with you guys? I'm so nervous to write the script. Like, I need to have access to you and just bounce ideas off you. Like, he pretty much wrote the script in their presence. JJ was only there to deliver a vision, but it's not really his, which is fine because I don't care for J.J. Abrams. The whole problem is that he's the mystery box guy. He's the one that likes to throw all the smoke and mirrors and curveballs and twists. I'm tired of that shit. I like Rian Johnson's straightforward approach.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, like JJ's directing style is amazing. He's a competent director, and I've enjoyed most of everything he's ever filmed. But
he's just not a good storyteller.
It's his creative side that's like, the whole Lost thing was all mystery box, and it told nothing. But it wasn't just him. But you see his other stuff, and clearly some of that was him. Like the whole idea of setting up all these mysteries that need to be solved, and I was fine that those didn't go anywhere. Like, I don't need that to always be the case. Sometimes people are just people. It's a big galaxy. It's not about where you're from. It's what you do. I'm pretty sure that's directly a Batman quote. Like, it's not what we do. Oh, wait, no. It's not what we do that defines us. It's what we do that defines us. It's not what we do. It's what we do. The car.
Oh, man.
So we talked about Rey's parents. We talked about, so Rey's power was a big complaint that people had in The Force Awakens. And it's a complaint that I guess is persistent throughout the trilogy. Many people were saying, I mean, the term Mary Sue came up a lot, which is sort of a catch-all phrase now for a character that is too undeservedly powerful. Like, too much serendipity is involved, and there's not enough explanation as to why that is. You know, like Anakin Skywalker, but apparently that was okay.
Right.
But wait, no, they did explain it. It was ear mites or whatever infected his blood and gave birth to him.
That's how he accidentally blew up a spaceship when he was 9. Everyone did.
Too soft, and the Force was too unbalanced. For the Force, it's not about good and evil. It's about yin and yang. It's about balance. Just as Anakin brought balance to the Force, now Rey is here to bring balance to the Force. And I think that's a perfectly fine explanation for her remarkable natural talents and her lack of meaningful parentage. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it doesn't matter where you came from. The Force was just like, yeah, we need to stir this batter a little bit. And it's getting too thick on one side. Put a little more water in there and get this to the right degree. Or I lost the metaphor I was going for there. you get what I mean.
Yeah.
It's funny because the first Star Wars film didn't give a crap about where anybody came from. It's all about, like, if you wanted to train in it, it seemed like in the original Star Wars films that anybody could pursue the path of the Jedi if they were dedicated enough. Yeah. And by the way, Luke learned to use the Force, like, on the Millennium Falcon after training for like 5 minutes on the way to the Death Star. It's like, oh, well, we've got a long trip. Want to learn the Force real quick? We could play Uno too, whatever. But then he sharpened up those skills with Yoda in approximately 2 days. Because if you look at the passage of time, he learned the Force as long as it took those guys to escape that worm's mouth. So unless if you think they were in that worm's mouth for like a couple months, which is ludicrous. Like I said, there were always problems with the Star Wars films, with timelines, with people getting the skills. But the thing about Rey, though, I think they made very clear is that she is perfectly capable of handling herself really well. Like clearly she's had a rough life where she's had to defend herself since she was a kid. Like in the first film, they showed she was skilled with that staff. So I don't have a problem with her being like somewhat adept at another weapon. And that's another factor into her seemingly out of whack abilities.
Yeah.
And people were complaining. Go on.
I was just going to talk about it's like it's almost every single character in Star Wars. They all have their fair share of being this overpowered, just overpowered character, but it's none of them have ever gone to like the level that Rey has gone to in these movies. We were saying earlier, it's like Anakin accidentally destroyed a space station when he was just a little kid. Luke on his first ever flight mission blew up the Death Star, and after 2 minutes of screen time of training, he learned how to pull a lightsaber out of the snow. It's like, who cares? I mean, do you think I'm going to get on every single character in Rogue One they can literally do everything? It's like, I don't care. And Rey actually, to me, we said it earlier. It's like she gets more excuses, I think, because of like her, her backstory in a way. It's like she grew up on a lawless planet. She had to learn how to defend for herself, and she's kind of cold to characters at first, but like, it's she knows this harsh lifestyle. She's not Miss Perfect. So it's yeah.
And people were complaining about how she was able to take on like the Red Guard or whatever they were called and hold her own, but she knows how to fight. She wasn't using the Force really. She was fighting them, and Kylo Ren backed her up with some Force powers.
Right.
But for the most part, she was just hand-to-hand combat, which she had spent her whole life doing, and that's totally fine. Yeah. And she wasn't so disproportionately powerful with the Force that she was able to even defend herself against Snoke. Snoke just like flicked her around with his wrist, and she was powerless. Like none of that mattered in the end. So I don't think there's an imbalance of power. I didn't think she was too strong. I think she's just, like Kylo. Kylo is naturally gifted too. They all just need training.
Right. And even if you do like overanalyze, if you want to like take the time to overanalyze her fighting style, I mean, you can even tell like there's scenes where you can see she's not perfect. She does have very open swings with her lightsaber, and even in Force Awakens, and yeah, sure, I mean, it's a bit of a far stretch that she won that fight against Kylo, although there are several factors as to why. For one, Kylo was wounded. He was shot by Chewie, a bowcaster that sent stormtroopers 30 feet in the air.
So and he just killed his dad.
And he just killed his dad too, yeah. So I think that fight's, passable for me, but if you really do want to take a closer look into Rey's fighting style, you could see it's not perfect. She messes up at some point. She even gets a mark on her arm in The Last Jedi from the Red Guards. Like, yeah, it's
like also in that scene, they were defending each other. So he had her back in a lot of ways and she him. So there was the concept that they could take on those guys as a team, which made them stronger, which I think is fascinating that they're playing with this idea that those two characters who were just on the opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of what they believe their goals are would have a moment where they came together and fought so well, which is one of the coolest side stories or anything like that you could possibly do.
Right.
Like, like you definitely haven't seen that in a Star Wars movie. I can't really speak for any of the side stories or anything like that. Like having a Jedi and a Sith basically back to back like that, or not even a Jedi or a Sith, like those terms aren't applicable anymore, but just a good versus evil thing. Like I love that kind of stuff. My favorite episodes of like G.I. Joe and Transformers were when the bad guys and the good guys teamed up.
Yeah.
Like there's that one Transformers episode where Megatron does his trademark backflip into gun form into Optimus Prime's hand. It's just so badass. He's like, I trust you enough in this situation that I'm going to let you hold me as a gun. And he's just like, load me. Like put an energon, put it like an energon bullet in the barrel and save the day together. Like I love that stuff. Like it's a classic. It's a classic story twist when the good guy and the bad guy team up to fight some greater evil. And you know why it's great? It's because if a bad guy is well written and good enough, we like them both. And so having them teaming up like that was just such a treat. Mm-hmm. But then they left it in a bad place, which is even more fascinating. They didn't just say that was cool, so we have potential here. She was like, don't go down this way. And he's saying, no, we have to. We have to say, screw the past and make this our own. And it wasn't even clear what he was talking about in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
What else to talk about? Let's talk about the final battle. Another problem that people have is that Luke seemingly dies from his fight with Kylo, and they're like, that's bullshit. All he did was project himself across the galaxy. Why would that kill him? And my answer is, why not? We don't know anything about Jedi powers other than that you can choke somebody, you can influence the way they think. Sometimes you can shoot lightning. Sometimes you can run really fast that you're literally a blur. Like, like in Phantom Menace. Like it's so awesome that George Lucas just dropped that immediately. He was probably like, oh shit, what did I do? Now the films will never make any sense. Like, why weren't they moving fast all the time? Like, I'm even shocked that made it in the film. Nobody was like, George, what are you doing introducing that as a Jedi power?
Because, normally when you introduce something like that early on in the movie, it's kind of foreshadowing that it comes back later in the movie, but it never does.
Yeah, no. In fact, I think Obi-Wan even turns to say something stupid like, fast run? Like, there's, like a name for it or something? Like, activate. It's so ridiculous. Like every time I think of people that are mad about these new films and then are saying like, we forgive you, George, for the prequels, it's like, no, like, I'll never forgive George for what he did with the prequels. The prequels are so funny. Like I went back and started watching them again, and I'll say that they're entertaining, but the thing that's so funny to me is that there's incredibly large chunks of time in the films that feel exciting but are worthless. Like the pod race is a worthless thing, like completely worthless. It doesn't do anything. Like it might establish Anakin as a pilot, but not really. And given how like precarious the situation is with the galaxy and this Trade Federation problem, the idea that Qui-Gon Jinn wouldn't just like take the part they need, like, you know what I mean? Like screw Watto, like that's insane to me. That's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also like negotiating with a very clear slave owner. Like there's a lot of weird things like, yeah, we'll do it fair, slave owner. Let's have a fair bet that if I lose, you get to keep your slave. Like, what? But then he cheats anyway to win the bet. So it's just crazy to me. So anybody that's saying it was all good before these new films is nuts. Just nuts. So this kind of brings us back to Luke. So in Empire, when he's learning how to use the Force, he's trying to pull his X-Wing out of the swamp, and it physically exhausts him. Like, we don't know anything about the Force at that point. Nothing has been consistent throughout any of the films with what Jedi can do, other than, move things telekinetically, choke, mind control. And that's all we really know that we've seen more than once happen in the films. So what we do know is that telekinesis is physically taxing depending on the size of the thing. Even when Yoda successfully pulls the X-Wing out and moves it over to a safer landing spot, he looks tired. He's completely wiped out. So that, for me, is enough to establish what the potential taxation of a Force power is, and depending on the size of it. And projecting a perfect copy of yourself across the galaxy that's convincing enough that everyone in an army believes you're there. Why wouldn't that kill him? He's already weak and old, and there's so much more defense of him dying than there is for him not dying.
Right.
Because he also cut himself off from the Force for decades. So who knows what kind of point of entry there is for that? And for him to go hard, if I don't go to the gym for 2 weeks and try to bust out the same workout I did 2 weeks ago, I'm in trouble. That's it. Like, he wasn't fresh. So to me, it was not at all unbelievable or unexpected that he died. And he kind of had to die, in my opinion, for the story to work. So I thought it was an awesome display of power.
Mm-hmm.
People thought it was weak, and that to me, that was the ultimate Jedi way that the Jedi Council forgot about. Like, to be so powerful that you don't even have to go somewhere to win a fight. Like, that's crazy. And to come out on top, that's like the most powerful thing I've ever seen. And things were grim for that team in the end. And just to buy time for their escape, I think is an awesome sacrifice. I love that. Like, he preserved the spark, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good sacrifice. And I think, like, it's just everyone obviously expected Luke to die in this movie. It's just, it's all the original characters, they're going to have their death at some point in each of these movies. And going into Last Jedi, I think most people were expecting it's Luke's turn this time. And it couldn't have been a better way. It was really great. It was selfless. Even again, it's not necessarily a win for anyone. It's just an escape plan. And it makes me wonder, it's like, why doesn't Ben Kenobi get this much criticism? Because he kind of did the same thing. So the difference is that he was physically there. He was physically there. But
exactly.
It's he just laid down his life for the greater cause. And I think that's a perfect ending for this character. And it works in the context of his arc too, because that duel between Luke and Kylo is one of the best in the franchise. It is not just because of the emotional, impact of it. And yes, that is incredibly strong, but it is one of the best looking duels of the entire franchise. The cinematography in that duel is absolutely astonishing.
Yes.
Got these very big and wide open shots, and I absolutely love it.
And it could not have been filmed more gangster. He just showed up like the ultimate samurai warrior, like the man against the hidden fortress, just nothing but his own bravado. That was such a mix of every Akira Kurosawa samurai movie and Clint Eastwood character, which are all essentially the same character, but you get the idea. Because it was also a mix of Western and Japanese too. It gave Luke the sort of samurai sort of inspiration that George Lucas had to begin with. Like, right. And I'm sure Lucas himself would have appreciated this, I'd like to think. But that is why this film is not sloppy at all, because leading up to that, there's so many loving details about that scene that a lot of people missed initially. One of them was that when he showed up, he looked younger. He looked like that. He looked like he did in Kylo Ren's memory, and that was intentional because he wanted to get in Kylo's head. So he showed up, and this is how I looked like the last time you saw me, when you thought I wanted to kill you and you were afraid of me. And then he shows up and gives Leia Han's dice, but when Kylo finds those dice later, they disappear. So everything was explained. There were no loose ends there. And then he shows up, and Poe even said, like, there's got to be a way out. How'd that old guy get in here? He got in here somehow. And it's like, no, he didn't. He just manifested. And there's also, there's the salt surface. He wasn't causing any of the red footprints to kick up.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that's a detail I fully missed the first time I saw this movie. Like, right. I'm not going to pretend like I saw the whole picture. Like, listen, I'm a genius. I understand that if you missed it, you're not a genius like I am. I'm a stable genius. So that scene was like expert filmmaking. That's the craft at its best and executed so well. I love that whole scene. Like, that was a type of finale you've never even seen in a Star Wars film, but it was not out of line with what you would expect from a Jedi, So if he showed up, it just started like corkscrewing around, I would have left. Like, screw this movie. That would have been stupid. Like, I hated it when Yoda did it. Like, the way that Jedi established themselves was that the more they had to rely on that stuff, like, the more they failed as Jedi. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the less you had to use your lightsaber, the more of a Jedi master you were. So this one felt totally in line with everything that makes sense to me for the Jedi. And also just Luke's disposition is not surprising either, because every single living Jedi master turned into a salty old hermit that isolated themselves until the galaxy forgot about them. They've all
Mm-hmm.
done it. Like, what Luke is doing is not surprising at all. Like, Obi-Wan is just living in a hut in the middle of nowhere. Yoda was living on a planet in the middle of nowhere. They all ran away and hid in obscurity because they were disillusioned and felt powerless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you just said right there.
And I think the point I'm trying to make is that, which is also kind of hilarious, is that once you start to look at the big picture of the story, it's a huge mess. Because if you just go into Star Wars clean and you don't have the backstory of the prequels, everything is believable. Everything that happens on screen is 100% believable because you're seeing it for the first time. The story is starting there, so there's no question about what can happen. Like, that's a sort of graceful entry point of any story origin, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
from there on, now there are all these weird problems. So yeah, Luke is in hiding. It's not the first time that's happened in the Star Wars universe. I don't even know why it's that crazy. I mean, the thing I like is that the way the films are made, they're so technically bomb. Like, they're such great films to look at. And there's clearly so much love put into every frame. I feel like the aesthetic has returned to something akin to the originals, but some of the most beautiful shots in this series were in this film, I
Oh
thought.
yeah.
And like the kamikaze scene was so like I would want that as a full-size wall mural. You want to talk about that sequence and
Yeah.
Holdo?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of people are hating on Holdo too. Um, what do you think of her?
Um, I'm gonna bring up one name, and that is Snoke. She's not meant. She's in service of Poe's arc, and I'm kind of surprised we haven't even talked about that yet. Uh,
Oh yeah, we'll get
yeah,
into that.
yeah. But it's. I think she's on her own. She's whatever, but like again, she's in service of Poe's arc, and Poe has a phenomenal arc in this movie. Um, but yeah, I think I wouldn't want Leia to do the sacrifice, and I wouldn't want Admiral Akbar to do the sacrifice. I would have done Holdo as well. She's there to be in service of Poe, and she isn't like necessary for any future installments, but I think she did her job decently in this movie.
Yeah, I thought her character was interesting. I will admit, when I first watched this movie, I found it a little frustrating that she didn't explain the plan to Poe, but only for one reason. And at the time, I thought it was because I didn't think that was the time for her to teach Poe a lesson. But then I gave it some thought. And here's what I think they were going for. Poe wasn't being taught a lesson. Poe wasn't entitled to anything. He was busted in rank, and he was no longer privy to that information.
Mm-hmm.
But since he's such a cocky, hot-headed, hot-shot, hot everything, hot, he didn't get that. In his mind, he was the bulk of the rebel fighting force. He didn't quite understand what it meant to be busted in rank by his superior. And as soon as she stepped aside, when he saw Holdo, the only thing he saw was somebody that he can question. He saw somebody he can undermine, and he was visibly distraught when he was passed over for promotion. Even though he screwed up so much and Leia busted him in rank, he still thought that her absence was going to mean he would take over. So he's a hero, and he's a good dude at heart, but he's not thinking clearly. He's still thinking like a hero. He's trying to be a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, he's undermining the chain of command. And so he wasn't entitled to any information. And not only does his mutiny completely backfire, he sent other people off on some harebrained scheme that didn't pan out and actually caused the loss of even more lives. And if he had done what Leia told him to do, but he seemed incapable of it because he didn't respect Holdo's authority, and his lack of respect for the chain of command actually resulted in not her withholding withholding any information from him. She did not owe him anything. Like, just follow orders, dude. You're in the military. Like, you don't get to follow the orders you want to follow. You're not better than anybody else here.
Yeah.
And I do love so much that they took that risk to like on having so many characters that we love and want to succeed be such failures in this film. Like, I thought that was a really bold and amazing story choice. And it makes him relatable because, I mean, Han Solo pretty much had an easy ride. He was a scoundrel, and morally he was great, but nothing ever really went wrong for him in that original film, you know?
Yeah.
It's very interesting, though, for a Star Wars movie to start making these kinds of decisions because that's just never the way it was. Like, it was always like there's a person in the room with everybody that was going to be doing the fighting in the room with them and explaining the plan. It was always to simplify that, hey, we're the good guys. Here's the plan. They were getting into some deeper thematic things that are pretty fascinating in this film. And I wish that The Rise of Skywalker followed through with that. And it seemed like Poe was a better guy at the end of this movie. Like, he got it. He started to understand the difference between sacrifice and leadership. And that's just gone in the next movie.
And yeah, then he comes up with the most reckless plan of all time. But yeah, he's a hothead, like you said earlier. He thought in his own mind what he was doing was right. And like, sure, destroying the dreadnought today would save your fleet tomorrow. But it was still reckless of him to do that. He got a lot of his own fleet killed, and and then by the end of the movie, everything he learns, then he calls off an attack. He decides to retreat because he doesn't want anyone else to lose their lives for his own cause, not the resistance cause.
Yeah. And I'm still disappointed in Finn. Like, my problems with Finn. I wanted Finn to be amazing. Like, I was so excited for Finn initially, and he was just letting me down the most out of any character in this trilogy. Like,
yeah.
I get why he's conflicted, but I don't like how his conflict doesn't manifest in, like, it only manifested in him being a coward. Like, he's always nervous and stammering and making excuses and trying to get away. I'm tired of that. Like, I'm glad by the end of this, he was like, I want to stand for something and rebel scum. Like that was a badass line.
Right.
But then the first thing he does is try to kill himself. Like, it's like, dude, come on. Do better by Finn.
Yeah. I'm gonna actually defend Finn a little bit here.
Okay.
I like his character in this movie. I will say, like, out of all the new characters in this trilogy, he's definitely the least interesting in this movie. Like, I would much rather follow up on what Rey and Kylo are doing, or Poe's side of the Resistance. It's definitely the least interesting in this movie, but I do like what he goes through in this movie, because something you have to understand is that Force Awakens, he wasn't necessarily all for the Resistance cause by the end of the movie. He just went to Starkiller just to save Rey, because Rey's the only, person who didn't try to kill him. And Rey was his only and best friend. So it's, he went to Starkiller with, not really with, like, he winged, bringing the shields down and letting the Resistance have a crack at taking down Starkiller Base. His main objective really was just to save Rey. The reason why he fought Kylo was to protect Rey. He did all of this for Rey. In Last Jedi, this is his, first time to actually do something beyond, the people closest to him. He actually identifies the cause and what he needs to do. And while I don't think that's as interesting as everything else that's going on in the movie, and he's definitely the biggest tragedy in the movie for that, but I still think it works.
The potential for his character was fucking awesome. Like, a Force-sensitive stormtrooper. Like, not only are we seeing under the mask of a stormtrooper, but he's conflicted. That's awesome. And they did not deliver on that at all. Like, I don't even need him to be force sensitive, but just someone that's more, I mean, because despite the fact that visibly stormtroopers are largely incompetent, like when Obi-Wan first started talking about stormtroopers in the original film, they were terrifying. They were like a killing force. They were fearless and highly trained. And so we're given one, and he's not fearless. He's not highly trained. He's a janitor. But why is a janitor out on a kill mission with the leader of the dark side? None of that made sense. Like, they didn't handle Finn in any cool way at all. Like, I get that some characters can't always be badasses, but you don't have to be a complete chicken shit either. Like, that sucks. I'm also disappointed in that I thought they were going to be kindling some kind of relationship between Finn and Rey. And I thought that would have been pretty awesome. Like, this girl who has this ability in the Force and is rising up in the ranks as a hero. And then you have Finn, who's this conflicted stormtrooper. Like, that's an amazing pairing. And I get that the whole film he was trying to get to Rey. And I like Rose as a character, but you're right. Like, that whole story arc was just so bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw somebody explain this on Twitter like years ago. Like, if you didn't like that scene, think about it this way. And they didn't explain anything that I didn't already understand, but they're saying that Finn needed to see that side of the Empire in order to become resolved and truly give himself to the rebellion. But it still costs too much. People still lost their lives because of it. Like, that's not enough to justify him being like, you know what? I'm down now. I wasn't down before, but I'm down now. Like, that operation cost the rebellion too much for it to have been worth it. And visibly, it just wasn't that fun to watch. Like, the whole thing was kind of a drag.
Yeah.
You know, I thought the casino was kind of interesting, and I'm definitely curious about that side. Like, we've seen some civilian life in Star Wars, but it's mostly been poor civilian life. Like, we've never really seen luxury and opulence, you know?
Right.
And I've seen a lot of people suggest that if the idea for Finn and Rose, like, to have just gone right to the ship and then having a sequence where he's using his knowledge of having been a stormtrooper to negotiate his way through the ship, like, that could have been plenty for him to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's also been one of my favorite go-to complaints about him, because everyone's got their thing. Like, hi, I'm Poe. I'm the best pilot in the rebellion. Hi, I'm Rey. I'm a naturally gifted Force warrior. I'm Rose. I'm an expert engineer. I'm Finn. I used to work here. My power is the knowledge of this base, which is valuable, but it's not presented in a cool way where he's like an insider. Like, he doesn't feel like an insider. He just feels like an outsider.
Yeah. But
hey,
I still think his character worked, you know, for
fair
what
enough.
it was, I think it worked.
Let's talk about Leia. Can we talk about Leia?
Okay.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is flying Leia. My feeling on it was that I was very moved when I saw that. Not just because of Carrie Fisher's very real death, but visually, I felt very moved by it. Like, I mean, I can't escape the idea that it was Carrie Fisher. It's impossible for me to pry that off.
Mm-hmm.
The very real weight of her loss affected me a lot, but I also felt it was a very beautiful moment, and I felt it was an interesting and very reasonable way to show someone using the Force. Yeah. Now, obviously, Leia has Force abilities, like, clearly. Vader said he sensed it in her, and as well as Yoda and Obi-Wan.
Right.
You know, she has as much potential as Luke, but she took a different road and became a general.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, with the Force, you know, Jedi can pick up chunks of rock and throw it, or like Yoda can grab one of those stupid giant chairs in the Senate. Like, you could spin it around like a pizza and chuck it. Like, you can hold it in the air with one hand and then spin it with the other hand and then throw it. And that's so stupid, right? Like, I remember when I saw Revenge of the Sith in the theater as a kid, as a 9-year-old, I was laughing and was impressed, like, that's kind of cool. But then immediately I was like, that's dumb. But anyways, the idea that somebody can move themselves through space by pulling yourself to the ship, like, that's all it was. I'd buy that. You know,
yeah.
Everybody kept calling it Mary Poppins. And it's like, yeah, all right. You have no sense of wonder left in your body, I guess. Everything just sucks all the time. You can't just be moved by something for a second. I mean, it was a little reverence for the Skywalker family, first of all. Like,
Right.
you're not going to just blast Princess Leia into space.
No.
And also it was for Carrie Fisher. I felt
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I was sad, and it made me feel good at the same time. And Luke kissing her on the forehead at the end, like, I was for real dribbling tears when I saw that. I couldn't even contain them.
Yeah, that was
Like,
that was really sad there.
mm-hmm. Like, I've been trying to let those go a little more often, but now it's excessive, and I'm a baby when it comes to watching sad stuff in movies. Like Bright, like in Bright when he
Oh
got
my
blooded,
God.
like the goosebumps were for sure there. All the signs were there. Like, the weather was right for the storm. It didn't quite get there though. Like, I'll never cry for something that's actually emotional. Like, I'll always cry for the stupidest shit. Orcs, man, that Orc Brotherhood is the shit. Like, carrying Will Smith on his shoulders, and then the Orc gang wearing big gold robes and hoodies and backwards hats, giving him props with some of the most beautiful shit I've ever seen. I can't help what makes me feel emotional. Like, it's stupid. I'm not gonna say that I'm not emotional, but I mean, you can't help it. You have anything about Leia?
You pretty much did it all for me. I mean,
What'd I do?
obviously, yeah. I was part of like the downer train when this movie came out. Or not, I mean, I didn't hate this movie at all when it came out. I just had mixed feelings on it. The main reason being, it's like, after I saw like all of and I'm going to call it toxicity because it was very toxic in my eyes.
Okay.
After like I saw that, I just wanted to like just not be a part of this. Like, I wanted to like just walk away, and just I didn't want I just didn't want to pile on to the toxicity that this movie already had. So I just kind of shied away from talking about this movie. Back when I first saw it, I thought it was visually like weird at first. Like, I mean, it was gorgeous on its own, but it's weird to describe because it was so pretty to look at, but also so weird to look at. But over time, this is something that it's just grown with me, especially like, after, further reflecting Carrie Fisher's passing, I think it's a nice send off for that. And of course, the scene with Luke kissing her for it, and that's so good. That's such a fantastic scene. But yeah, I think Leia was really, really good in this movie, even though she isn't in it too much.
Yeah,
she's gone for like the second act of the movie, and I'm wondering if that's because of her passing.
I don't think it was though. That's
wasn't
the curious thing.
Shot before her
passing. This is all shot before her death. They confirmed that all of her scenes were filmed for The Last Jedi.
Okay.
So, I mean, who's to say? Do you have anything else you want to bring up for The Last Jedi?
I think that's everything. Yeah.
I think that's it.
I think we got it.
So yeah, happy Star Wars Day, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you found some enjoyment out of this. Hopefully. But yeah, feel free to share your thoughts on this movie in the comments. Like, be sure to tell us that we're wrong, but also why you disagree with us. Don't just call us stupid. Don't say we're wrong. We will have a reason to debate with you, but you got to bring something critical to the table. I understand if you didn't like something, but don't tell us we're wrong unless you have good reasons. Like, I've seen too much of it online. It's almost like having a political debate. It's really bad out there with Star Wars debates. And I'm just exhausted from it. I'm just tired of talking to people on the internet when you don't have that bridge that you have in real life. Like, I can have these conversations with somebody in real life, but not online.
No, it's a different reality now. You can't like anything in Star Wars unless if it's made by Dave Filoni.
Yeah, why does everything have to be so divided nowadays? That's what I don't understand.
It's not just they're just movies. I mean, it's like, it's not the end of the world if somebody thinks that Luke doesn't work or does work in this movie. It's literally just a movie.
Yeah, but it's not even just Star Wars. It's like everything, like Marvel fans, like Snyder cut fans, I'm never gonna shut up about that Snyder cut. Was it that good, guys? Was it? Like I was bored to tears watching that movie. I
Like,
don't.
I
How is
just
it
I
good?
just say the words like, yeah, I think it's better than the original cut, and then all of the Snyder fanboys like, oh yeah, see, we were right. I'm like, I never said it was good. I just said it was better.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about all we have to say about The Last Jedi. So yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in once again. Next we'll be continuing our MCU marathon. We're going to kickstart phase 2. Iron Man 3 is next. So thanks again, everybody. Stay safe out there. Bye.